Auditioning for audiobooks. It's a mysterious game, ain't it? You don't know what works, what doesn't, what's right, what's maybe taboo. We're going to talk about all that and more. What I've found helpful for myself, just sort of the things that I think contributed to my booking the job, and what I've heard from some of the authors that I've worked with on why they decided to work with me and why they liked my audition. I'm going to use two different books that I narrated this year as sort of touchstones to talk about things, case studies, if you will. The Strange Case of Jane O. and Caught Stealing. The first couple pages will dive into each of those and talk about my thought process as we're going, just sort of a play-by-play. Before we dive into that proper, though, a quick little caveat on this whole game. A lot of it is out of our control, and that's somewhat of a double-edged sword. And what I mean by that specifically is so much of this is subjective. It comes down to an artistic collaboration between a performer and an author, and what each of us feels is going to best suit the book. And if there's a synchronicity between this, then great, and then the project goes forward. But if one of us has an idea that the other doesn't see or a vision that the other doesn't see, that's okay. It doesn't mean anything necessarily. It just means that we weren't right to work together on this one book. And I find that on the one hand, you can't do anything about it, and that's kind of lame. But on the other hand, you can't do anything about it, so why worry about it? And I find that liberating in the sense that it enables me to just do the performance that I feel intuitively will best suit the book, whatever it may be, and present that and myself more honestly to the author rather than trying to do the right thing, trying to game the system, figure out what they want to hear. That you're dead in the water if you're trying to reverse engineer that. So I find it very liberating to go on that tack. Let's talk about The Strange Case of Jane O. first. So this book, with most auditions, you'll receive a summary of the book, typically very similar to, if not identical to, the blurb you would see on the back of the novel if you were looking at it in a bookstore or something. And occasionally, they'll give a little bit more detail if it's pertinent to the character. So say the character has a very specific arc that they want to hear, they may give you that information as well. And then they'll give you a character breakdown, talking specifically if it's a first-person narrative, such as this one. They'll give you a lot of information about who this character is, their history, and some of their relationship with the world and the other characters in the story at large. And that can be really helpful in crafting your performance and understanding how the character might best be portrayed from your own perspective. So this character is a psychiatrist, as I knew from the brief and by reading this, and that informs a lot of my approach to things. But before I get too heady about it or go in and analyze the text or anything like that, I just dive in and give it a cold read. That helps me to get a sense of the author's tone for the book or in general, as well as a vibe for the character, how the character talks, how they speak, how they see the world. And just trying that on is a little bit more helpful for me personally than going through analyzing and marking up a script. So we'll just dive in. I'll read a little bit about this, and I'll talk through some of the things that are going through my head as I'm reading it to give you an idea of how my brain is processing things during this cold read. I would record this and probably a second take just to iron things out, but I rarely do more than that simply because then I start thinking about things. And audiobook production as a whole, you don't really have a lot of time in an audiobook production to go back and really redo a lot of stuff. That can be helpful in an audiobook audition, but I personally feel it's a little dishonest if I'm reworking moments a lot. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but just that in the actual production of the book, my intuition for things is going to be the main driving force behind my performance rather than a lot of analytical stuff. That may just be my method of doing things, but that's kind of the way I roll, as they say. Let's dive in. Jane O came to my office for the first time in the spring of that year. She was 38 years old, Her medical history contained nothing unusual. This was her first visit, she said, to a psychiatrist. She spoke softly, as if concerned about being overheard. She did not remove her coat. So in these first few sentences, or paragraphs, however you want to call it, the thing that's really helpful here for me and what's going through my mind is knowing that this character that I'm playing is a psychiatrist and is treating this patient. A few things fall into place. Firstly, that there is a great deal of compassion for this patient. Almost all psychiatrists that I've encountered have a great deal of compassion for those that they treat, and this would be no different. So there is that sort of compassionate connection between my character and Jane O. But at the same time, these first few sentences read almost as if from a patient's file, as it were. If I were to hand you a dossier on Jane O as her psychiatrist, I would probably have some of this demographic information. 38 years old, first visit, her medical history, nothing out of the ordinary. I remember she didn't take off her coat, so it's somewhat analytical with an edge of that, what's the word, compassionate feeling toward Jane O. Let's keep going. She didn't say why she had come, and she had left much of her paperwork blank. But a silence can be useful. I've learned to let one bloom. And so we sat for a while without speaking in my small office on West 96th Street while the city thrummed around us. Jane sat very still on the couch. She kept her arms crossed. Minutes passed. So as this goes, I'm sort of blending the lines because this story here is both at the same time a retelling, but also in the listener's mind and somewhat in my mind as the character, a reliving of that moment. And what that affords me is when I talk about the silence and the tension that filled that silence, these are things that I can play with. I can let the listener's mind fill the silences that I allow in my narration, the pauses. I can give them that to fill out the details surrounding them. It might sound different and feel different if I rush through this. Jane sat very still on the couch. She kept her arms crossed. Minutes passed. That's perfectly acceptable read, but it lacks that tense patience, the waiting, and my reliving of seeing Jane on the couch and just letting that silence rest until she decides that it's time for her to speak. There was a time when I would have found it awkward to sit so long in silence with another human being, but I've grown used to it over the years, the way other doctors do to the nakedness of the body. She wore a gray sweater and tortoiseshell glasses. She was pale and she was slim, very little makeup or none. A simple gold bracelet encircled one wrist, no rings. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "It's just hard to explain." So the decision I made with Jane's voice was a little bit different here than it was with the actual narration of the book. With the actual narration of the book, because the other narrator on the title was cast, we collaborated and sent each other voice samples so that each of us had an idea of how the other sounded, so we weren't totally off base in terms of the vocal representation, either for me to her or vice versa. But the overall tone and vibe of this book, already I've inferred from this passage in a way that because it is written as a sort of diary or a missive of some sort or a disclosure, I don't know what the right word is, but it's written as sort of a document from my character's perspective, chronicling the events that took place in my relationship with Jane as a patient here. And so it doesn't really play, and the other characters that come into the book, to give them really full-blown character voices. I'm approaching it more so if I were this psychiatrist telling a colleague or a friend this story. I may shift my voice to when it's her talking, but I'm not going to give it like a full characterization. But when I come back to myself and then shift to her, it'll be a subtle energy shift, but still maintain the core of my character, because I'm ultimately the one retelling the story rather than painting this whole narrative thing, which is different from Caught Stealing, which we'll transition to essentially now. But if you have any questions about this book in general or how I approached it, let me know. I can dive into more details as the questions arise. Caught Stealing, very different vibe, very different title, and yeah, just completely different approach. So again, I get the book, get the brief, and I get the first few pages for the audition, and I just give it a cold read and dive in, record everything. Same thing, I'll pause and talk about things that come up when they come up. My feet hurt. The nightmare still in my head. I walk across the cold floor, shuffling my feet in the light grit. I'm half drunk, and I have to pee. I'm not sure which woke me, the piss or the nightmare. Okay, so a lot of really juicy details in this first paragraph already. One, my feet hurt is a funny line to start with. I don't know if it's ha-ha funny, but it's unusual. It's glib, it's snide, and it's a trend in this book, or a theme rather. And so it struck me in that way. And the way that it goes from my feet hurt and then the nightmare still in my head, I walk, it's in present tense across the cold floor, shuffling my feet in the light grit. So the clues here are present tense means that it gives me license, or at least the way I interpreted it, gives me license to live very much in the moment, which was an exciting opportunity and why I loved working on, one of the reasons why I loved working on these books. And so understanding that, I can go back and really invest in the current experience of this character. In contrast to Jane O, where it's very reflective, I'm writing a diary of sorts, it's in the past. This is in the present, which has just different performance opportunities. Let's take it from the top again, and I'll invest more in the present tense quality. My feet hurt. The nightmare still in my head. I walk across the cold floor, shuffling my feet in the light grit. I'm half drunk, and I have to pee. I'm not sure which woke me, the piss or the nightmare. My john is just a bit smaller than the average porta potty. I sit on the pot and rest my forehead against the opposite wall. I have a pee hard-on, and if I try to take a leak standing up, I'll end up hosing the whole can. I know this from experience. Plus, my feet still hurt. It takes a while. By the time I finish, I'm just about asleep again. I get up, flush, and shuffle back to bed. On the way, the last bit of piss dribbles onto my thigh. I pick up a dirty sock from the floor, wipe the urine off, and toss the sock in a corner. I crawl back under the covers and twist around a bit until I'm arranged. I start to drift back asleep, and the nightmare begins to rise up again in my mind. I force myself fully awake to keep it from getting back in. I think happy thoughts. I think about a dog I used to have. I think about Yvonne. I think about baseball. Long, lazy games of baseball. Plastic cups of cold beer between my thighs, peanut shells crunching beneath my sneakers. Fly balls soaring out over loping low outfielders. The beautiful ease of the long pop fly out. No, wrong. Baseball is a mistake, and the nightmare is rushing back in. I think about home. Home does the trick, and I start to ease back asleep. And only then, as I finally fall asleep, do I register the blood I saw on the sock when I wiped my leg. The blood from my piss. I sleep. So the cool stuff in this one, obviously, it gives us a lot of information, depth about the character, mysteries about the character. Why is this nightmare so important? Why is baseball a mistake? All really interesting clues to dig into and invest in. And a lot of the authors that I've worked with have said that commitment is one of the big things that helps authors to buy into your performance. So what I mean by that, and what I think they mean by that, is if I'm kind of like hedging my bets and giving a neutral performance because I don't really know the direction this character is supposed to go. Are they supposed to be a bad guy? Are they supposed to be a good guy? I don't know. If I have questions and I don't make the choice to take a chance and just fill in the gaps where I can, then I'm not filling in the gaps, and it's a sort of half-empty performance in that respect. So by committing and saying, Yvonne, I don't have any context over who this character is at this point, but I can assume that perhaps it's a love interest or someone very important to me as an author, a dog I used to have. What does that look like? What was the dog's image in my mind? Baseball. Then I go on this long diatribe about baseball. Clearly it's important to me. Clearly I know a bit about the game. And because I say, I think happy thoughts, I know that all these things are happy things, but then baseball takes this turn where I have to bail out of baseball, and that in fact conjures the nightmare again. So that journey is just a really exciting thing to invest in, and I hesitate to use the word decode, but because there's nothing necessarily to decode, but the analysis I just walked through, can really give me a lot of details that I might want to explore. And whether they're right or wrong, that can feed into your own intuition about something. If there's information in the audition posting about the book, that can be helpful at times. But if you don't have the answer, make something up. Just make a choice, because even if what's in your head isn't what's on the page, you're at least filling in the gaps, which is a huge win there. And then regarding the sort of play-by-play of this thing, because it's very cinematic in the way that it's written, I'm detailing events. I'm saying I walk in here, I do this action, I'm thinking about this thing, then I remember, then this happens. It's very play-by-play and very action-focused. And the thing that I find beautiful about that is it allows me to infuse all of that with the emotional stakes underlying it. So my feet hurt. I've got this sort of bed of exhaustion. I'm tired. And then we learn that I'm peeing blood, which is an alarming thing. And that comes to light on basically the next page or so. But if this were just my audition page, which I think incidentally it was, I get to fill that in and just understand, oh, this is something here, and I can piece things together as I'm going because it's present tense, which was really rewarding here. Again, I loved both of these books, and auditioning for them was a great joy because when you read good stuff, it's just fun. But if you have questions about the things that I'm talking about here, let me know, and I'm happy to dive into more detail. Really quick, just before we sign off, in terms of the technical side of things, I just clean it up very lightly. I essentially make sure that there's no extraneous sounds, no pickups. I'll very lightly process it. I may do a little bit of compression in case there's an up or down, if there's a lot of dynamic range, and then I'll normalize. But essentially, it's a very similar process to the audition workflow that I outlined in my How I Audition video here on this channel. So you can check that out if you want to see the technical side of things on how I approach just all my auditions in general. Anyway, I hope this was helpful. Until the next one, be well, everybody, and I'll see you there. Toodles.